Now I'm going to show you a position from a game I played against a Russian grandmaster who's living in America now, named Serper. The game was played in May of 1998 in Chicago, a big open tournament. The most important part of chess for you to study is the endgame. A lot of kids make the mistake of studying the opening too much. What you should do is you should study the endgame and learn the basic principles of the opening so you can make sense of any position. If you know the rules, you can handle anything. But if your opponent has a trap for you waiting in the opening, it's very important to have a good sense of danger and to spend some time figuring out what their ideas are. Just don't get nervous. If they have something waiting for you, you can always figure it out if you know the principles of taking the center, developing your pieces well, keeping your king safe. In this position, it's white to move. It looks like the bishops would naturally be traded now, but I played a very strong one. Rook takes d6. My opponent obviously took back. And this creates a piece dynamic which I often talk about with my students. Here his rook is pinned to his queen, so the rook can't move right away. But also, I have tension on his rook. What I mean by that is my bishop can take his rook, but his rook can't take my bishop. This is a very good relationship for me. So there's no reason for white to right away play bishop takes d6, because I'm trading off the exchange, which would mean it would be an equal exchange if you look at the last two moves, but there's no reason for me to do that. Now black does have a threat. He wants to play rook d1 check, get out of the way, and then take my bishop. So I defend it with queen e3. I'm improving my queen to a good attacking position. Notice now my queen can come to a7 later on. That could be very good. I'm threatening to pile up in lots of ways. And here my opponent took my hanging pawn. He played bishop takes g2. And once again we see, beware of the hanging pawn. A lot of the time your opponent is going to leave something hanging. Before you take it, make sure there's nothing waiting for you. Now I want you to stop and think about this position. It's white to move. It's a cool tactic I used, but very hard to find. Take your time, see if you can find the win for white. Now wait a minute, are you going on before you see it? Don't give up so easy. Okay, my rook is hanging on h1, we see that. So your first idea may be to move out of the way, but then I've lost a pawn for no reason. Okay, I'm going to work you through this one, but I'm not going to give you the answer so quickly. In this position, black is up an exchange and a pawn, but he has doubled pawns, so it's not terribly important. My rook is hanging on h1, so your first instinct may be, the rook has to move, clearly. So what I want you to do now is to visualize all the different parts of the board. When you're looking at tactical positions, you don't just calculate, you have to know where to look. And it's important to notice the open lines, the open files, the hanging pieces. Always notice the hanging pieces. Actually, ChessMaster has a cool function in which the computer shows you in different positions what pieces are hanging, what pieces aren't. So in this position, there are two black pieces which are simply hanging, the bishop on g2, and his rook on h8. So this is what I want you to do. Imagine for a minute that the white bishop, black rook, and black queen were off the board. Now take off the white knight. Do you see a fork for white? Okay, I'm sure you see I can attack the black king and the black rook with queen c3 check. So we see white's basic idea. I want to win the game by taking advantage of this fork with the black king and the black rook. Now let's return to the position. We want to remove all those pieces from the critical lines. I want to use the queen c3 fork. How can we do this? Now, my opponent is a strong grandmaster and a very good tactical player. So he didn't see it, which means it's not easy to find. I'll tell you a secret. I had prepared this position 2 years earlier with a grandmaster named Larry Christensen. In fact, in my annotated games for the adults, there's a game I played against Larry Christensen. In the same tournament that I played against Serper. A funny coincidence. Take your time now. Okay, my first move was bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. I would only relieve that tension if I had a very specific idea. What did I have in mind now? Now everything has to come very quickly because my rook is still hanging on h1. Do you see the point for white? Take your time, don't move until you see it. Now I played knight b5. Not only is my rook hanging on h1, but my knight is hanging on b5. This is a tremendously strong move. And suddenly black is in huge trouble. If he takes my knight, I'll just play queen c3 check. If he interposes with either queen c6 or bishop c6, I can play queen takes h8 with check. Then I can move my rook out of the way, and I'm up in exchange. If he moves his king to d8 or b8, queen takes h8 is still check. And if he tries king d7, getting out of the way, so now queen takes h8 would be a big mistake, because he can take on h1. I'd be down a piece. What is my idea here? Ah, yes, I take advantage of a skewer. I move my rook out of the attack, rook d1. His rook on h8 is still attacked, and now I'm going to win his queen. He has two options. Either he gives up his queen, queen takes d1, and then moves his rook, but I'll be up a queen there. Or he can block with bishop d5, after which I can simply take his rook on h8. That looks pretty good for white. I'm up in exchange. So we see that taking the knight loses for black. The bishop can't take the rook because his queen is hanging with check. There's no way for black to defend the c3 square, is there? The last try is queen b4, trying to defend c3. Now I can't play queen c3 check. What would you do with white now? Queen b4 does cover the forking square on c3, but here I can create a new fork. You see what it is? I can play queen e5. And this is a special kind. I'm forking a rook and a square. I'm forking the c7 square, which is mate. And if he defends that by taking the knight, then I take the rook with check. And I'm still winning. Take a look at this position after knight b5. Try to find a way out for black. There are lots of ideas. You can play moves like queen d8, for instance, but then white's attack is unstoppable after rook d1. Work it out. You'll see that white's position is winning. So after knight b5, my opponent was forced to give up material. What he chose was a takes b5, queen c3 check, king d7. Now I played the move that I already described, rook d1, and after bishop d5, queen takes h8, I've won an exchange and I went on to win the game. You can also find the end of this game in the library. It's pretty instructional how I won. Just used my rook and queen to surround the black king and mate him. So from the first few games you can see the power of a trap. A lot of the time our opponents will set traps for us, so keep your eyes out for the danger signs. First of all, be careful about hanging pawns. Sometimes there'll be a surprise waiting in the bushes. But if your opponent hangs something and you've analyzed it, you don't see anything for him, you have to take it. You never want to trust your opponent. You have to be confident. If they feel that you're not confident, they'll take advantage of it. So study tactics, be confident of your ability to calculate, and then go after him.